first question about how, you know, it seemed that this should have not been going on still, right? That we came in, that English settlers came in the 1600s, and you'd think by then they wouldn't still be kicking Native Americans off their land, right? But think of what happens at Indian reservations today. Some of the highest poverty in the country is at Indian reservations. Some of the highest rates of illiteracy, meaning they can't read, they can't write, they aren't giving proper education, is on Indian reservations. How is that a reflection of what happens just from this first Indian removal with President Jackson?
But I think it was like that because throughout history, Indians were never glorified. So if you're never glorified for anything you did, or any of your achievements was never put out there, then of course you're going to be put down. And it also comes from a hierarchical standpoint. They're at the bottom of the food chain, and all these. Of course, if you're at the bottom, they're going to think you're unnecessary, and they're going to think that you have no place in their society, so they're going to want to kick you out. So that's probably why Indians are viewed that way.
I would like to say I agree with him. I think
We thought they was justified in their actions. They thought they were trying to help the Indians by taking their land and like moving them off to these other countries and stuff where, like into the wilderness, as they said here. They're like, you can stay here, but you have to follow your own rules, and they make it seem like their rules are so savage and like their rules, the white people's rules are so much better. They're like, oh, you can stay here, but then you're not going to be civilized like us. They're making it seem like, oh, you're lower than us, you're not on our same level and stuff like that. So they're like inferior to the whites and the white side.
Yeah, but in the last paragraph, to me it seems like they want to help the Indians, like teach them to be civilized a little bit, because it says, of course, it says, teach them the arts of civilization by as well as it's destined to perpetuate the race and to attest to humanity. Are they talking about the Indians or are they talking about themselves?
I think they're talking about themselves, because if you read furthermore in that paragraph, at the end, like one of the last sentences, it says to raise up an interest commonwealth designed to perpetuate the race and to attest the humanity and justice of this government. It was talking about themselves. It wasn't talking really so much about the Indian race. It was talking about how could they make themselves better, how could they bring themselves
But
up.
if we pause really quickly, I'd like all officers to review their roles, make sure they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Make sure you are pushing the inner circle to question. Make sure you are seeing the respect and participation that you're supposed to in the Socratic seminars, right? Also, those of you who have questions for people in the inner circle that aren't officers, you may write them down, and I will give you a chance to ask them in a few minutes. Okay? Continue.
We should hear from Adam.
They should be distinctly informed that if they remain within the limits of the state, they must be subject to their laws. So right there, they're justifying why they're trying to convert these people into citizens, or maybe not even citizens, but just make them move away towards the west of the Mississippi. But they also said that temporarily, just as long as the citizens, the actual people, didn't need that land. So when they decide that they need that land, are they going to keep pushing them forward?
For the Indians further west, I agree also with Wadami because President Jackson was acting on the interests of the majority, which was basically progress agriculture. And in order maybe to preserve the Indian way of life rather than adapt or assimilate to the American, maybe that was the justification of why they were forced into reservations in order for them to govern themselves. But nothing was, according to this, was definitely no more for the Native Americans.
We have an officer jumping in.
Okay,
Yep.
so all of you guys are talking about Jackson's justification, but do you think that freeling poison fought that justification? Or do you think that he had his own views?
I don't think that freeling poison fought the American justification. In history, you said that it's basically for the majority. If you look back in history, the Americans, they started off as the minority, and the British, they were conquering over the Americans. And in the third article, it shows the Indians, they show the contradiction of the Americans, because it said this served no substantial interest, whatever awakened in the American colonies a spirit of firm resistance. They were talking about the taxation that the British imposed on the Indians. So how can, in democracy, you have to listen to both the majority and the minority. You can't just focus on one group. How can
This is where any of the Socratic seminars end, right? Discussions always continue, but I do want to switch to the outer circle just for the next 10 minutes, and we'll all have a chance to do more of this. But I want you to turn to the article on Rod Blagojevich, please. This does not require talking, right? Now, inner circle. You are now the outer circle, but you're not actually going to move. And I want the officers to hand their descriptions to someone in front of them in the inner circle. And that person in the inner circle is now that officer. All right, so raise your hand if you are the respect officer, respect police. All right, Effie. Clarification. Please clarification. Questioning, please. Ivan. Camille, what are you?
I am the evidence.
Evidence, police, and participation. And Latia, devil's advocate. All right, so what question is the outer circle answering, or discussing, rather?
We're discussing the spoil system.
Sorry, a bit louder, please. Guys, you need to be listening. Jesus is talking.
We're discussing the spoil system and Rob, I don't know if it's not...
Blagojevich.
Blagojevich. And how his corruption, his political corruption, and trying to sell the seat, so I said Barack Obama send it to sell the seat.
Right, and how does this relate to Andrew Jackson and his anti-democratic ways that we were discussing, whether you believe they're anti-democratic or not? Yeah.
Well, trying to sell his position was a violation of the First Amendment, which is undemocratic. Just like getting rid and like basically chasing Americans out of undemocratic.
Right. Can someone define the spoils system under Andrew Jackson? Latia?
I don't know if I'm completely right, but I think that's when they was like saying, since you're close to me, you're my friend, you get better privileges than the people that's not as close.
Right. What is it when you spoil a child? You give them what they want. You give them what they want, right? When Andrew Jackson had his supporters after he won, he would give them places in office to reward them for their support. That's basically what this article accuses Rod Blagojevich of doing. Now, outer circle, I want you to think about whether you think it's the same thing, right? Or, and whether you take the side of the article, because clearly is this a biased or an unbiased article? It's biased, right? But I want you to also think about how he says in the last, let's see, third to last paragraph, he says, Jackson himself denied the charge, but for just about all of American history, presidents and governors have used the power of appointment in this way. So did Jackson go beyond what everyone else is doing? Did he cross the line or not? And did Rod Blagojevich? So that's what the outer circle needs to be discussing between anti-democratic and democratic ways. Yeah.
No, I just had a quick question. Is there a such thing as a non-biased article?
What do you think?
Well, no, like every person has their own opinions, and there's always going to be some sort of bias in it.
Well, we talked about that when we first read Howard Zinn the first week, right? And how, as human beings, it's hard for us to put aside all the things, the notions that we've been raised with, right? But, yeah, Nico.
And it's always important to look at both sides.
Right, so the in-between, right, of finding an in-between of biased and unbiased sources, right? It's like when we looked at the Boston Massacre, and we looked at both biased sources, but used it to see what the facts were. You can look for the objective facts, but ultimately when you're writing an editorial or a newspaper, those are usually called opinion pieces because you place your opinion in them. So it's up to the reader to decide if it's biased or not, and that's what you guys are doing right now. So are we all ready to begin?
Yeah.
All right, outer circle, remember everyone needs to be participating, and inner circle, you are now taking notes and you're the officers, okay?
I understand that your friends might not always be on the same point as you, but since you put them in office, they might feel obligated to how you say, to accept your opinion, because they might disagree with you, but since they're friends to begin with, that's automatically a plus. Plus, they already put you in office, so they might feel obligated to agree with you in that position.
I would like to say what Aisha said.
I agree with Jesus, because if somebody hires you, then you're gonna automatically feel as if you have to agree with that person. Even if you disagree with them, you're gonna feel as if you have to agree. So, what was the about who? That's not what it's about. It's about what everybody feels. And